welcome to the Deep Dive. It is so good to have you with us today.
Got to be here. We have a really fascinating one for you.
We really do. So I want you to imagine, if you will, signing away 5 years of your life to a legally binding contract, one that sends you thousands of miles into just, well, a complete unmapped void.
Right into the absolute middle of nowhere.
Exactly. You are going to be paddling rivers that don't even have names on a map, enduring these brutal physical extremes, and chasing beaver pelts on behalf of basically a cutthroat corporate monopoly.
It is wild to even think about.
It is. And today we have an incredible stack of source material for you. We're looking at excerpts from Tristan Hughes' novel, Boundary Waters. We are plunging straight into the bizarre, deeply psychological, and honestly darkly comic world of the 1804 North American fur trade.
And our lens for this journey is a character named Arthur Stanton.
Yes, Arthur. He is this fiercely naive, really bookish young clerk from Lower Canada. He enlists for this journey expecting an elegant adventure, like something straight out of the pages of Robinson Crusoe.
Which, spoiler alert, is not what he gets.
Not at all. Instead, he is immediately confronted with a frontier that fundamentally alters human psychology.
And I think it's important to state our mission for this deep dive right up front, because it goes far beyond a simple recounting of a historical adventure. We are examining the absolute limits of human endurance under extreme isolation.
Right.
We'll explore the absurd, almost surreal lengths people will go to for commerce and personal reputation. And perhaps most importantly, we are looking at the violent collision between our fragile civilized pretensions and a wilderness that is entirely indifferent to our existence.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the severe physical and psychological awakening Arthur experiences the second he attempts to enter this world.
His initiation is brutal.
It really is. It begins in this muddy, chaotic street outside a tavern in Lachine. He's handed a tin cup of a horrific period liquor called Shrub.
Oh, the Shrub.
Yeah, Arthur describes this concoction as a total abomination. It's this mixture of low-grade rum, bitter orange peel, and sugar that essentially tastes like poison.
And performs a terrifying alchemy in his stomach.
Exactly. And the physical toll of the journey only escalates from there. He is thrust into an environment where the daily sensory experience is just a living nightmare. They are surviving on a never-ending, monotonous porridge of dried peas.
And cornmeal.
Right, cornmeal and heavy pork grease. And the mosquitoes. They are so thick they aren't just an insect annoyance. Arthur literally describes them as moving, humming particles of the dark itself.
Which is such a visceral image.
But the rivers are even worse. Arthur harbors a deep, profound phobia of water, yet everywhere the canoes travel, he is confronted by a watery graveyard.
Yeah, the riverbanks are dotted with these simple, hastily nailed wooden crosses.
Marking the spots where previous men have drowned.
Those crosses serve as a constant, morbid ledger of the stakes out there. You see markers for Jourdain of Sorel or young Roy of Terrebonne. And it's important to understand the men Arthur is traveling with. The sources frequently use the term voyageur, which, in the context of 1804, refers to the contracted French-Canadian laborers.
Yeah.
They were the literal human engines of the fur trade.
These were men expected to paddle heavy birch bark canoes for up to 14 hours a day.
14 hours. Over steep mountains carrying hundreds of pounds of cargo, surviving on that exact diet of pork grease and peas.
And the narrative tension here stems from the profound clash between Arthur's romantic expectations and this grueling reality. To make sense of the terror and the sheer physical exhaustion, Arthur clings desperately to a book his father gave him.
Xenophon's Anabasis.
Yes, an ancient Greek text. It's a historical account of Greek soldiers trying to navigate their way to the sea to get home. Arthur is trying to map a classic, structured, Enlightenment-era narrative onto his own life.
But the wilderness does not recognize classical literature. Nature up there lacks any narrative arc. It is fundamentally random.
The environment just doesn't care about his need for a hero's journey, and what happens to the character young Godin shatters that illusion completely.
Godin's story is so tragic.
He's a teenage voyageur, barely older than Arthur. He still has plump, healthy cheeks, looking entirely out of place in this rugged crew. During a particularly violent stretch of water, he gets caught in a whirlpool at the bottom of a rapid.
And the force of the water snaps his leg like a dry twig.
Pushing the jagged bone right through the skin, William McLeod, the trader Arthur is apprenticed to, is forced to set the bone right there on the muddy bank with absolutely no medical supplies.
Predictably, Godin falls into a severe, consuming fever.
The truly heartbreaking aspect of his death is the psychological state of his final moments. He isn't experiencing some grand, heroic vision of exploring the unknown.
No, in his delirium, his mind reverts completely to his childhood.
Right. He is terrified his father is going to beat him because he hallucinates that he is back on the family farm and a cow has escaped its pasture. He dies of the infection before the expedition even reaches Lake Huron.
Godin's death is the catalyst that destroys Arthur's romanticized worldview. And for you listening, consider a time you embarked on a massive life change, maybe starting a demanding new career, launching a business, or moving to a foreign city.
Armed with highly romanticized expectations.
Exactly. You envision the prestige and the grand adventure of the endeavor. Then, the unglamorous, grueling reality sets in. Instead of an adventure, you find yourself dealing with the modern equivalents of pork grease and mosquitoes.
You are confronted with the sheer, unyielding exhaustion of simply keeping your head above water.
Realizing that the romantic vision was merely a psychological shield against the difficulty of the work.
And as if the battle against a random and indifferent nature wasn't punishing enough, the sources thrust Arthur into an intense macro conflict. This narrative is effectively a cutthroat corporate thriller taking place in the middle of nowhere.
Arthur's boss, William McLeod, is a sullen, heavy-drinking, deeply disgraced trader working for the XY Company.
And in the landscape of 1804 commerce, the XY Company is the scrappy, underfunded underdog. They are locked in a vicious struggle against the monolithic Northwest Company, or the NWC.
The visual contrast between these two corporate entities when Arthur finally arrives at the Kaministiquia River is just staggering.
It really is. The Kaministiquia River serves as the front line of this corporate war. The NWC has established a sprawling, bustling hub known as the New Fort.
It is a massive emporium filled with hundreds of men. They have milch cows, they operate their own brick kilns.
And the corporate partners strut around the compound like aristocrats, wearing top hats and tailored scarlet coats.
Directly across the river, sitting in stark opposition, is the XY Company's post.
It is a dilapidated, rotting log shack where the roof leaks so badly it rains indoors, and their entire logistical support consists of one gummy-mouthed mule.
The juxtaposition is almost comical.
But the rivalry is fiercely high stakes, yet the day-to-day behavior of the men is aggressively juvenile. You have the wealthy NWC men literally standing on the riverbank, dropping their trousers to moon the XY crew.
And throwing rotten cabbages across the water at McLeod's head.
It feels like a schoolyard fight, but the underlying economic reality is deadly serious. What is actually driving this bizarre behavior on the edge of the map?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the cabbage throwing and the mooning are psychological release valves for crushing economic pressure. Mr. Ogilvy, the intimidating head of the XY Company back in Montreal, dispatched McLeod and Arthur with a singular, desperate mission.
They're not out there to explore or map the territory.
Not at all. They are there to intercept a fortune in extremely rare Missouri furs, gathered by two legendary elusive traders known only as Long Arm and Copperhead.
And Ogilvy frames this mission using a concept borrowed from 19th century whaling law, right?
Yes, the rule of loose fish versus fast fish. In whaling, a whale swimming in the open ocean belongs to no one. It is a loose fish. But the moment a whaler sinks a harpoon into it and secures the line, it becomes a fast fish. Legal property.
Ogilvy applies this exact framework to the fur trade.
Out in the uncharted wilderness, where there are no courts, no police, and no established property rights, those Missouri furs are loose fish. The entire survival of the XY Company hinges on McLeod finding Long Arm and Copperhead first.
Transforming that loose fortune into a fast fish before the NWC can get their hands on it.
Precisely. And that economic desperation breeds intense frontier espionage. The NWC is fully aware of what McLeod is trying to do.
They have this elegant English trader named Hearst, who dresses impeccably in a pristine beaver felt hat stationed in a wooden watchtower. Hearst spends his days peering through a brass-looking glass, monitoring every single movement McLeod and Arthur make around their rotting shack.
The tension is palpable because the XY Company essentially sent a ghost to fight this war. McLeod carries a massive, dark cloud of baggage.
He is universally despised by the voyagers, and the NWC treats him like a pariah. So what actually happened out in the Athabasca country a year prior to ruin McLeod's reputation so thoroughly?
The Athabasca expedition is a harrowing study in psychological trauma and survival. A year before Arthur meets him, McLeod was actually working for the rival NWC.
He was sent on a highly dangerous mission into the Athabasca region alongside a bitter, deeply resentful trader named Sugar.
In an attempt to secure an advantage, they chose an unmapped route, a river system nobody had navigated before. Predictably, they capsized in a violent rapid on the Black River.
They lost their canoe, their weapons, and critically, their pemmican. Now, for those who might not know the term, pemmican was the ultimate frontier survival ration. It's a dense, high-calorie brick made of dried, pounded meat mixed with rendered fat and sometimes berries.
That meant losing their only guaranteed fuel source in a barren landscape. Stripped of their pemmican, they begin to starve to death.
They resort to scraping black lichen off the rocks and boiling it into a slime.
They eventually cut up their own leather moccasins and boil the hide just to drink the broth.
McLeod manages to use their final piece of shot to kill a single seagull. However, the bird is raw, rotting, and filled with partially developed embryos.
Eating it triggers a horrific sickness. McLeod collapses, hallucinating on the brink of death.
At this moment of ultimate vulnerability, Sugar commits the ultimate frontier betrayal. He attempts to steal the damaged canoe and abandon McLeod.
They get into a desperate physical brawl in the shallows of the river. McLeod miraculously survives the ordeal and is eventually rescued, but Sugar vanishes entirely.
And the frontier rumor mill takes that vanishing and weaponizes it against McLeod. The story that spreads down the rivers is that McLeod aggressively hoarded the remaining food, stole Sugar's clothing, and left him to die in the snow.
There are even whispers that he resorted to cannibalism.
That single event ruins his standing. He's excommunicated from the NWC, written into their disciplinary black book, and sent down to Montreal in utter disgrace.
But the physical survival on the Black River is only a fraction of the story. The sources reveal a profound internal shift that happens while he is chewing on that rotting seagull.
The psychological survival defines McLeod's entire character arc. Out there in the snow, facing imminent death, he experiences a radical clarification of his values.
He realizes he didn't take that suicidal mission into the Athabasca for corporate glory or out of loyalty to the Northwest Company.
He took the massive risk because he was trying to rapidly accelerate his career and build a formidable reputation. He wanted that reputation so he could secure the hand of Esther, who happens to be the daughter of Long Arm,
the very man holding the Missouri furs.
McLeod had promised Esther he would return to Rainy River by autumn to marry her. He missed his own wedding because he was dying on the Black River.
In that moment of near-death clarity, his corporate ambitions dissolve entirely. The fur trade, Mr. Ogilvy, the NWC, it all shrivels to the size of a grain of dirt. The only thing that retains any meaning is Esther.
That realization creates what the sources describe as a Siberia of the mind. McLeod becomes trapped in an internal wasteland of regret, constantly tracing a mental map of where he was supposed to be versus where he ended up.
It adds a heartbreaking layer of humanity to this cutthroat espionage plot.
When McLeod finally arrives at the frontier to secure the loose fish for the XY company, he discovers that Esther is actually there at the outpost, but she is traveling under the protection of the rival NWC.
She is living inside the enemy's impenetrable fortress, frequently seen alongside the English spy, Hearse.
When McLeod attempts to approach her and explain why he missed the wedding, she delivers a sharp, devastating expletive and refuses to acknowledge him.
It represents the ultimate tragic irony of human ambition. McLeod sacrificed his physical well-being and his moral standing to build a reputation worthy of Esther. Yet the very actions he took to secure that reputation are exactly what destroyed his chance with her.
He is left physically present but emotionally exiled, watching the life he wanted play out behind the walls of a corporate rival.
You see that psychological breakdown reflected in almost every person Arthur encounters.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The sheer isolation of the frontier acts as a bizarre magnet, warping the people who manage to survive it. For instance, consider the veteran voyager Old Crabessa.
He is missing an ear.
But not from a glamorous battle or a bear attack. His wife bit it off years ago during a domestic quarrel before he left for the woods. Instead of discarding it, Crabassa preserved his own severed, salted ear in a leather pouch that he wears around his neck.
When he thinks the rest of the crew is asleep, he pulls the severed ear from the pouch and holds it up to his living ear, much like you would hold a seashell to listen to the ocean.
He claims he can hear the echoes of his past and his wife's voice asking him why he abandoned his home.
The environment demands a psychological toll, and individuals cope by turning their physical traumas into talismans.
Another voyager, the Bowman Hyacinth, is missing his nose from a tavern brawl. He spends the entirety of the 1,000-mile canoe journey furiously scanning every face at every trading post they pass.
He isn't looking for furs. He is obsessively searching for the specific man who bit his nose off, solely so he can fight him again.
The isolation funnels their focus into these hyper-specific, obsessive behaviors, and the surreal nature of the landscape really peaks when McLeod and Arthur travel to Kakabeka Falls to investigate the mysterious death of an XY clerk named Labrie.
They're looking for the man who delivered Labrie's frozen body, an eccentric, retired Hudson's Bay company manager known only as the Governor.
When they find him living in the misty spray of the massive waterfall, he isn't residing in a traditional log cabin. He has constructed a house entirely out of pale driftwood that has been smoothed by the river to look exactly like giant prehistoric bones.
The structure resembles a cage of ribs and femurs.
The Governor sits on a driftwood throne inside this bone house, hallucinating old naval battles with the French Navy, shouting orders to fire imaginary cannons. And his sole companion is a giant, incredibly well-mannered pig named Samuel, who casually strolls out of a nearby cave.
Arthur feels as though his classical Greek texts have been replaced by a grim fairy tale.
What's fascinating here is how the extreme isolation doesn't merely breed individual eccentricity, it completely melts down and synthesizes their entire belief systems.
Survival in a void requires what anthropologists call spiritual syncretism.
The voyageurs are fundamentally French-Canadian Catholics. Before they leave Montreal, they stop at the Church of St. Anne to pay for masses, begging the Virgin Mary for safe passage.
However, the moment their canoes hit the vast, unpredictable waters of the Great Lakes, that classical structured theology instantly breaks down.
When the wind dies on Lake Huron, stalling their progress, old Crabassa doesn't pull out a rosary to pray to a Catholic saint. He performs a jongleur.
He drops a copper penny and a pinch of tobacco directly into the dark water to appease the Mother of the Winds, a local indigenous spirit.
Why do men who are so devout in the city immediately abandon their traditional faith the second they are in the woods? They seem to be aggressively hedging their bets spiritually.
They hedge their bets because traditional European theology doesn't offer a functional framework for the chaos of the North American interior. They develop a deep, pervasive paranoia.
They fear the local Sioux warriors to such an extent that every time an owl hoots in the dark canopy, the voyageurs immediately assume it's a raiding party signaling to each other.
McLeod makes a brilliant observation about the psychology of the men in the sources. He notes that when the voyageurs stare into the impenetrable dark forest, they would actually prefer to see the devil old Nick than to confront the reality of an empty wilderness.
The devil is a system they understand.
Exactly. Believing in a malevolent, scheming spirit is significantly more comforting than facing the sheer, indifferent, random emptiness of the landscape.
If a demon sinks your canoe, it has a motive. If a submerged rock sinks your canoe, it's just terrifyingly bad luck. They project malice onto the landscape because malice implies they are important enough to be targeted.
When we pull all of these narrative threads together, Boundary Waters dismantles the sterile, historical view of the 1804 fur trade.
It wasn't merely a simple economic supply chain of rugged men gathering pelts to make felt hats for gentlemen in London and Paris.
It was a brutal, bizarre psychological crucible. It systematically stripped away societal norms, classical education, and religious dogma, forcing these men to confront their primal selves, their absurd coping mechanisms, and the crushing weight of their deepest regrets.
For you listening, the narrative asks you to reflect on the nature of the entrenched oppositions in your own life.
How frequently do we allow ourselves to become completely consumed by our own modern versions of the NWC versus XY corporate war?
We get caught up in the rat race, aggressively fighting over job titles, market share, or social standing. We spend our energy throwing metaphorical cabbages at our rivals.
But eventually, much like McLeod freezing to death on the muddy banks of the Black River, we might experience that harsh moment of clarity where we realize our priorities were entirely misplaced.
We risk losing the relationships and the core values that actually matter, all for the sake of chasing a loose fish.
It's a sobering realization.
It really is. Now, earlier we discussed the absurd cutthroat tactics employed in this corporate war, like staving the rum barrels.
Right, taking an axe to the barrels and letting all that valuable rum bleed into the mud just so the rival company can't have it.
Exactly. Well, there is a specific profound moment in the novel that happens right after a petty fight over those staved barrels. The men use Arthur's prized copy of Xenophon's Anabasis to swear an oath.
And in the chaos, the book gets dropped.
Yes, it slips and sinks straight to the bottom of the Kaministikia River. The one thing tying Arthur to his old world, gone.
A powerful image.
So, I will leave you with this final thought to mull over as you navigate your own week. To survive the entirely new, uncharted frontiers of your own life, what old world books, preconceptions, or outdated knowledge do you need to finally let sink to the bottom of the river?
An incredible question to end on.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We will see you next time.